Hi guys, beautiful weather out there. So I've been out with it all day, soaking in some rays, as they say. But yeah, I've been meaning to do a couple more videos on the autism overlap series, and one that I was going to do, and I feel like it's kind of changed in a way because when I was doing my research on it, I couldn't find a nice Venn diagram. That is, as we get into the darker stuff. So it's autism and narcissism, or in particular, like narcissistic personality disorder. But narcissism itself can be very damaging. You don't have to be necessarily disordered with it, to be a very toxic person. And there's a lot of traits that can be quite damaging for everybody else, but then also for the person themselves, and I feel like people often think of high functioning autistic people as being quite narcissistic. And I mean, I can get that. Like, I can see where that comes from, because like I've certainly been guilty of being a know it all before. And, if I knew about something, I'd want to tell everyone everything, you know, or you might correct people because there's a right and a wrong way. So there's very black and white thinking, so it's like, no, you're wrong. It's supposed to be like this, you got it wrong. And you're kind of making a point when it's like, okay, we get the point now, and it might look like you're trying to correct people to make yourself look better. Usually, it's just because your brain works a certain way where there's a right and a wrong way of doing something, right, wrong, and this is the right way, and you can't understand why people would do it the wrong way, and ways that I could probably describe this best is that I was doing a job in a pharmaceutical company. And there's a lot of rules and regulations that you have to follow, standard operating procedures, SOPs, and you've got good manufacturing practice, GMP. But there's so many rules and regulations, right? And then people couldn't even follow a simple rule of go up the left-hand side of the stairs. You know what I mean? For me, being autistic, rules definitely do help. It helps you make sense of the world for sure, and I couldn't understand for the life of me why everyone couldn't just walk up the left hand side of the stairs. It even said walk up this way with arrows pointing, and it's like it couldn't be easier. It's like you're obviously just not bothered, you're not looking, you couldn't care less. I couldn't understand why people couldn't follow those rules. And then if they're not being followed, you see people not following other rules, and I remember seeing a lad that I knew at the top of the stairs, and he was going down the right, which was the wrong way, and I was going up on the left. So I was like, "Oh, how are you, Joe?" And he was like, "How are you, Daniel?" I was like, "You're on the wrong side, Joe. So I won't be moving over. You go over to the left, and we won't have a collision." Um, Now, to some people, that might look a bit arrogant, and like I'm correcting them for the sake of it. I get where you're coming from, but personally, being neurodivergent and in particular being autistic, it's very easy to follow those rules. And if everyone does it, then everything runs smoothly. But because people don't and are always cutting corners, that just drives me mental. Because then everybody will look at you and go, "Oh, you're the problem." When in reality, they're not following the rules, and they'll all kind of be on the same wavelength, or at least pretend to be. And you're kind of going, "But you're doing it wrong." You know what I mean? And it drives me mental because I'm trying to make sense of the world, and everybody's like, "Oh, just do it this way or just do it that way," and they're doing it wrong. They're doing it arse ways, but they're trying to convince you that they're doing it the right way. And then everybody just hops on the same bandwagon and makes it out like you're the problem when in reality they're all the problem. But if everyone else is the problem, majority rules as always, so you've got to fall in line with what they're doing. I hope that makes sense, but that's how I would imagine autism could look like narcissism, given that if you know something about a topic, like I would just keep going on and on about something if I knew it. It's a bit of a know-it-all, arrogant way of looking. I understand how it can look, but it's because I'm passionate about something and I want to tell you everything about it. You know what I mean? Um, with narcissism, I would just talk about narcissism in general, not narcissistic personality disorder. Where it becomes a personality disorder is where you start to lose jobs and friends and everything, and people start to get sick of you because you're such a egotistical prick, basically, and can imagine dealing with someone who's highly narcissistic. You wouldn't want to be around them, for good reason. They're exhausting to deal with, and so I think the example I just gave is a good comparison. So I might correct someone because I know the right way and they're doing it the wrong way, but then I look like a prick. And especially in Ireland, we tend to not like people who know what they're talking about. I've just noticed that it's a big thing. It's like, oh, who does that arsehole think he is? But kind of going, he's right though. And I've noticed it a lot with health and safety when someone points out that someone's doing something wrong. They'll often turn to me and go, oh, that lad's a fucking prick, isn't he? And I'll kind of go, hey, yeah. And then I'm like, well, we do have to do it that way because we have to stay safe. When you're mates with people in work, you're kind of like, oh yeah, what a prick. But then people who are in positions of authority and are narcissistic are nightmares to deal with. And you don't have to be a doctor to go, they're an egotistical, narcissistic prick. You can't diagnose them with NPD, the personality disorder, but you can definitely say they're highly narcissistic, like they're full of themselves. Do you know what I mean? And that's how it's going to come across. So I always want to make it more relatable. I don't want these mad big conditions that you can't visualize. I want you to think, how's that going to look in everyday life? And as always, I'm not a doctor, so I can't diagnose anyone, but I don't think I need to be to go, there are people out there who are very damaging to your mental health, and you need to be able to identify them and look out for the key signs and know how to defend yourself against the dark arts. How someone who is highly narcissistic, I feel, will criticize you is they will look for opportunities to criticize you, and I'm not going to give any names, right? But there was this fella doing my manual handling certificate for me in a job that I had, right? And well dressed, posh voice, seemed reasonably okay, but looked like a little bit of a knob. Didn't seem too bad, but as we start getting into the sessions a bit more, I couldn't stand the fella, like he was just, because he was teaching us about ergonomics and how to sit correctly, and he was such a know-it-all. And he loved correcting people, really loved correcting people, and I hated it. And I think he's a good example to give because I felt kind of uneasy being around him, and I could see other people getting kind of uneasy as well. And the examples I'm just going to give are, I couldn't diagnose this fella now, but I'll just say he was quite egotistical. So if there was anything he didn't know, he'd say, "Oh, sure, how would I know that? I'm not an expert in." He literally said, right, because I was talking about, we were talking about pressure on the spine, the lumbar column, and the different areas of the vertebrae and all that. We were talking about, going through doors, and I'm 6'4", so I was joking, saying, "Yeah, any advice on how to step through a door frame?" And he was like, "Oh, I wouldn't know that. I'm sure I'm not an expert on doors." I was like, "Okay, you could have just said, sorry, no, no idea what that." But of course, he chose the arrogant response. "Oh, I'm not an expert. What do you want me to tell you about that?" It's like, Jesus, you're a fucking nightmare. And then we were talking about, like, he obviously was a rugby fan, so I thought, well, there's a common ground right there. I was asked him what team did he play for, and then he told me on our lunch break, and then I was like, "Oh, you can help me avoid all my injuries in rugby and give me advice on how to avoid injury in the future." I was obviously joking, obviously, and he turns and says, "Oh well, I'm not here to talk about rugby with you all day." And then kind of laughed a little bit, kind of giddy. I was kind of like, okay, and then he was talking about his sons playing rugby, and I was like, "How are they finding it?" And this was a real telltale. This is when I kind of changed my entire opinion. This fella, I was like, "What an arsehole," as he was talking about his sons playing rugby, and present tense, it sounded like. I said, "Are they enjoying it?" And he goes, "Well, they did enjoy it," like really emphasizing the did, as if I was stupid for saying that they are enjoying it, not that they had enjoyed it. He was like, they're all grown up now, as if I should know that. Like, I'm not a fucking mind reader, you know? I should have fucking said that. He was like, oh, I thought you said that they were still playing the way you said it. And he was like, no, 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 they're out of school a long time now. Um, and just the way he went on. And then when we were actually doing the lifts, like lifting boxes and whatever, he was all, hurry up, come on, let's go. And, being very impatient, but kind of rude about it. And then one of the women in there didn't know exactly, she had to go onto the course last minute. So she was in heels and she was doing one of the lifts. And he was like, next time you should choose better, more appropriate footwear for the lifting. And she was kind of looking at him, you don't want to be an arsehole, but this fellow he was very passive aggressive. And I'd say that's a real telltale sign. People who are narcissistic aren't going to give you something directly. Like if they start screaming and shouting at you, then it's pretty reasonable for you to scream and shout at them. But it's going to be stuff normally where you kind of think about it for a minute and you're kind of like, oh, what an arsehole. It's not going to hit you immediately. They're very good at putting doubt in your mind and making you doubt yourself. The guy was getting ready to lift the box and I was waiting for him to look. He's like, come on, let's go. And I was like, well, are you looking? And I start getting kind of thick with him at this stage because he was really doing my head in. I was like, well, are you watching me? I need to know you're paying attention. He's like, don't worry, I have eyes in the back of my head. I was like, well, as long as you pass me for the course, I couldn't care less where they are, to be honest. And then I needed to have the certificate generated for the end of the week because I had to start sampling my job. So I needed to have my manual handling. And me and a few others said that we needed the certs ASAP. And he said, okay, come to me at the end, give me your email addresses and I'll generate the certificates for you. So he had his diary and he handed it to me well, he was about to hand it to me and I said, oh, so will I just leave my email address in here then? He goes, yes, that's what I'm asking. Like very much, very stupid, of course, that's what I want you to do. So I grabbed the book off and put my thing in, my email address, threw it on the desk and walked out. It's like, you ignorant fucker, you know what I mean? And just really, just a really condescending fucker. That's the impression I got. And like I say, I couldn't diagnose him with anything, but he was so fucking condescending. I hate people like that. They're draining, they're exhausting to deal with. And you'll feel it, you know what I mean? You'll feel yourself start to become exhausted when you're dealing with these people. Autistic people can be more so, I speak on behalf of all autists, but can be harder to engage, as I would say. Might definitely be some things now that you would say overlap with narcissism, but and I mean they can coexist. They absolutely can. So I mean, you can have one and the other. You know what I mean? And we all have varying degrees of narcissism because otherwise we'd have no ego, no self belief or nothing. So it can be healthy anyway. But sorry, 1 second there. Well, it's not as if, one has to exist and if one exists, the other can't. You can absolutely have both. Um, but rather than doing overlap in this video, I want to kind of highlight how, as autistic people, it makes us more vulnerable to narcissistic abuse. And I'm going to share my screen with you now, show you. So I'll put me up there. So, autism spectrum disorder, ASD, and narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, are distinct conditions, each with unique challenges and characteristics. ASD is a developmental disorder that affects communication and behavior, and it's considered a spectrum because there's a wide variation in the type and severity of symptoms people experience. On the other hand, NPD is a personality disorder characterized by a long term pattern of exaggerated feelings of self importance, an excessive need for admiration, and a lack of empathy for others. While these disorders seem fundamentally different, individuals with either diagnosis may face misconceptions and stigma There is an opportunity for better understanding when comparing their social aspects and relationships, coping mechanisms, and the journey to adulthood. Knowing how to navigate these conditions can lead to more effective support strategies, including therapy and advocacy. And a few key takeaways here. ASD is a neurodevelopmental disorder that varies widely in how it presents, while NPD involves persistent patterns of self centeredness. There is a need for increased understanding to reduce the stigma and misconceptions associated with both ASD and NPD. Effective coping strategies and support are crucial for individuals with ASD or NPD. Now we just have a few nice diagram here. So I couldn't find any Venn diagrams, as he said, but just want to highlight something. If anyone with NPD or just narcissism in general realizes that it's becoming a problem and they want help with it, fair play to you. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm not saying anyone's evil, but there are people who definitely need a reality check and to be told you can't carry on this way, because you're being a fucking arsehole. And the thing is, people with NPD are going to be highly unbearable to deal with, as you start to see how arrogant they are. And I think that's what makes it more vulnerable. I think it's what makes autistic people more vulnerable is the fact that people with narcissism are highly confident. They're very charming and they have a high sense of entitlement or self belief. Something that I think we wish we could have, and that leads to you thinking, oh, they're very confident, they're very outgoing. They know exactly what they want and they're willing to do anything to get it. And that's the thing. They don't care who they stand on to get it because they lack empathy. That's not to say that they're completely devoid of it, but or don't have it, I should say, just to make it easier. But it's very small, right? And you never know if they're just trying to charm you because they're very good at talking their way out of a situation. They can come across as very charming. And you think you're going to see them coming, but you have to realize they're master manipulators. They know how to say the right thing to impress you. They're not going to be some arsehole immediately. Like the lad I mentioned was perfectly pleasant at first, but then just start getting real condescending and passive aggressive. And I just didn't like being in the room with him. I hated being around him. I thought he was an arsehole. I wanted to punch him by the end. What people like that are like, they just drain the fucking life out of you. So we go further down anyway and just go into it. So we talk about autism first. And then we talk about the distinction, because I want to say these are two distinct conditions. It's not as if if you have autism, you have to have narcissism, but also that you can have it if you have autism, but the two don't have to coexist or not exist together at all. Hope that makes sense. So, understanding autism spectrum disorder. Autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is a complex developmental condition that involves persistent challenges in social interaction, speech, and nonverbal communication, and the presence of restricted and repetitive behaviors. The spectrum nature of ASD means that each individual with the condition has a distinct set of strengths and challenges. Defining autism spectrum disorder. ASD is a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects all individuals across gender, race, and socioeconomic status. So it doesn't matter what your background is, it can affect anyone, basically, is what they're getting at. It's characterized by diverse behaviors ranging from highly skilled to severely challenged. Social communication difficulties. You may notice this as trouble with conversations or making eye contact. Key takeaway: ASD is a broad spectrum and no two individuals experience it the same way. And then the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 5th edition, DSM-5. So, two core areas is where they look at, so what stands out most with autism spectrum disorder, ASD. That would be deficits in social communication and interaction that are not accounted for by general developmental delays. So basically, meaning someone could just be, late to the party in terms of development, but this is obviously affecting them, it's deficits. Although, I mean, I developed certain skills later, but I did develop them, you know what I mean? So it was difficult, but I think a lot of people can get there. It's just going to be a bit harder, you know what I mean? But anyway, we have the deficits in social communication and interaction that are unaccounted for by general developmental delays. And then we have restricted, repetitive patterns of behaviors, interests, or activities. Diagnosis considers the individual's developmental level and may involve assessments, both behavioral and developmental evaluations, and observations across multiple settings. So the key takeaway, another one, an accurate diagnosis involves careful observation and assessment based on the DSM-5 criteria, considering the person's developmental level. Repetitive activities, such as lighting up toys or echoing phrases, intense interests, often in specific topics or objects. So it can be very much, fine tuned. I used to love killer whales as a kid. I used to love David Attenborough documentaries. I still do, but back then I could tell you everything from them. I don't know where that went really, but I'm sad that it did go because it would have been nice to keep that, that childlike wonder that I had. But yeah, I don't know what happened with that. It just seemed to evaporate, and then I got into sport, and that became more of a thing for me. Response to sensory input, like aversion to specific sounds or textures. Remember what I said before about loud noises or like the feeling of jeans on my skin or the pockets in your school shirts on the nipples. Don't know about other countries, but in Ireland we have to wear a shirt to school and a uniform. So a lot of fun. Different people on the spectrum may display a mix of behaviors and degrees of severity, which is why it's termed a spectrum. Exactly, meaning like you experience difficulties in different levels, or you might experience difficulties in one area more than another. You know what I mean? Um, so it's not one size fits all. You might be more sensitive to sound. I might be more sensitive to taste. You know, some people might have more habits that they have to follow, um, while others might just echo phrases. That would have been more my thing. So another key takeaway is we're getting a lot of them, aren't we? The spectrum aspect of ASD reflects a variety of behaviors, sensitivities, and interests. And then it's just a list there of what you can expect to see. So this one was quite upsetting for me because my mum said that I would reject cuddles and hugs. It must have been upsetting for her as a parent saying that as well. I became quite withdrawn. Um, can have epilepsy with it as well. And maybe meltdowns could look like that the odd time or could coexist with epilepsy. Sleep problems, yeah. I barely slept up until age 15, and then when I was prescribed Prozac, that's when I finally started sleeping. My mum said I'd never slept up until then, the full night through, ever. Which is quite worrying for a parent, as you can imagine. Prefer to play alone. Yeah, it's not that I wanted to be alone, it's just that it was easier. I couldn't communicate with other people my age, so it was easier just to stay on my own. I just couldn't find the common ground with them, you know what I mean? So it was quite exhausting, to be honest with you. Depression, yes. I think I've spoken a great deal about that because you feel isolated, you feel alone. So it's a very lonely spot to be in when everybody else seems to pick up on everything and you're kind of left isolated on your own. It's not a nice place to be. So depression definitely follows with it, you know, sadly. And you experience burnout, so the burnout can lead to the depressive symptoms because you're just worn out, you cannot function anymore. You know what I mean? And very challenging, unfortunately. Not responding. Yeah, sometimes I would just be interacting on my own and people would be talking to me and I could hear them. It's not as if I was completely out of it, like psychotic, but I didn't want to talk to them because I was like, oh, just leave me alone. I don't want to, I didn't know what to say. It was just too difficult to come up with anything to say back. So I I kept to myself and just wanted to be alone. Hyperactive, absolutely. You probably hear that in some of my videos. And then attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. As I say, diagnosed with it originally, but then it was taken back. Though there may definitely be some truth to that. Delayed speech development, learning disability. I was always quite good academically, but I found it difficult in the classroom setting, you know what I mean? So that could be challenging for me, for sure. Individuals with ASD might find social interactions and communication more challenging than their neurotypical peers due to understanding nuances like body language or tone of voice, expressing themselves both verbally and non verbally. These challenges do not indicate a lack of desire for connection, but rather a difference in processing social information. And that's exactly it. I could see that everybody else knew the latest trend, the latest popular thing, but I would just pretend that I knew what they were doing and copy exactly what they were doing. And I foolishly thought that I was being, I would even say, I thought that I was fitting in, that I was going under the radar and I knew exactly what they were doing, but I hadn't a clue, I hadn't a clue at all. Um, Body language or tone of voice, yeah, couldn't pick up on cues, especially in primary school. Got better as I got older, but it was very challenging. Yeah, and expressing myself, I didn't give off an awful lot when I was younger. Anyway, I remember it was funny because the ASDF, ASD, autism spectrum disorder, plus the F, the first three letters in the keyboard, and the ASDF films like on all the little videos on YouTube. We were watching them in primary school, and I was roaring laughing. And I remember one of the lads said that's the first time he's ever seen me laugh properly, and he was like, "It's good to finally see." And I thought, Jesus, am I really that much of a miserable prick? But I was, I didn't really pick up on humor the way other people did, and I found it quite difficult to connect with other people. It could be quite standoffish, but it wasn't for lack of trying. I just didn't know how to fit in or what I was doing. Obviously, I was a lot more awkward than I thought I was, but wasn't for lack of trying or lack of desire. It was just that I stood out. I stuck out like a sore thumb. It really did, and it can be quite damaging to your confidence when you just don't know what's going on or how to be confident. Come across as confident because you're not. You're having difficulty understanding the nuances, as they say there. So that's a good word for it, actually. I would say nuance. Dunstars freshly squeezed orange juice. Absolutely amazing. It's delicious. Ooh, bought it freshly today, especially in the hot weather. Oh, it's so refreshing. The key takeaway here, even though you might face communication hurdles if you have ASD, it doesn't mean you're not interested in forming relationships. It's just that interacting can be tricky and might require support. Exactly. Plus, if you are the odd one out, you're an easier target for people like this, who are highly narcissistic and very confident. Because what they need is someone to put down to make themselves look bigger, and better. They need to look good, but they also need to make you look bad. It's like you can't just be even. I've got to be up here, you've got to be down there. I can't just go up, you've got to go down. So I look better. You know what I mean? I hope that makes sense. It makes us particularly vulnerable because we stand out, so we're awkward, we're clumsy, we don't pick up on stuff as well. So it's easier for them to manipulate us, unfortunately, and I've heard a lot of people say that they've unfortunately been the victims of narcissistic abuse and bullying from people like this, like your one staring at herself in the mirror. So narcissistic personality disorder we come to now. And like this is where it becomes a pervasive pattern, where someone is really just up their own hole and putting you down, condescending, correcting you all the time. They come in and just have an air about them. And, when people just are uneasy around them because they know if there's anything wrong with them, this person would pick up on it instantly. And I'm not going to mention names, as you say, but a lad from my friend group who be quite childish when you call him out on stuff and quite narcissistic in nature, and him and two other of my mates were living together, and one of the lads got a haircut, and because it was a skin fade, but one side was longer than the other, and he started having a full-on panic attack because he knew that this other lad would pick up on it instantly and start giving him grief for it. Like that's the level of anxiety you face with someone who is quite narcissistic because they're going to point out every flaw that they can. And lo and behold, he looked up when he came home, saw it, and started picking up on your man's hair. And he was so embarrassed by it that he just paid for a fresh haircut, but he went back the next day and bought another haircut because bought a haircut. It's a weird way, but paid for another haircut. And like haircuts aren't cheap nowadays, especially not if you want the skin fade. I would have just gone back and said, "Oh, you didn't even it up." Not that I need it, but you know what I mean. You're always on edge because you know they're going to pick up on everything that you do wrong. You know what I mean? Any clumsy thing, any twitch that you have, or any tick or weird way you walk or stand, they're going to pick up on it. And I'm guilty of doing that too because I was in that environment where you're looking for weakness all the time, to pick up on things that people do so that you can get one up on them. And I mean, I'm going to be honest, there's no point in doing this channel if I'm not going to be honest. I've done it. I'm not proud to say that I have, but when you're constantly around people and you're trying to one up each other, that's what you do. You become like that. You become more narcissistic, and I've got to own up to that. I'm no fucking angel. But the causes are environment, genetics, neurobiology, they say. And how you can prevent it is child therapy, family therapy, and attend parenting classes. But good luck doing that. Very hard to get people like this to attend therapy because they don't think there's anything wrong. You're the problem, not me. So why the fuck do I need therapy? You need therapy. There's a lot of finger pointing, you know what I mean? And you need to go see a therapist, not me. I'm perfect. I've got the crown on my head. Why would I need to go and see a therapist? There's nothing wrong with me. It's all your fault. You know what I mean? And a lot of people don't see anything wrong with it. They see themselves as they're just better than you. That's how you're going to see this turn up, especially if it's gotten to the point of a personality disorder. And we'll see it here. So what you're going to see is need for continual admiration from others, self-perception of being unique and superior, and there's no justification for it. They just are. They're just better than you. You know, there's no rhyme, no reason. I just am better than you. Your achievements are nothing compared to mine. Your problems are not as big as mine. So, a good example of this before, where a husband and a wife, and a lot of times where you'll see narcissism displayed as in men, and then like borderline histrionic would be more of a feminine thing. Although that's being debunked as complete bullshit because it's just that being highly emotional is seen as more of a feminine thing, whereas being confident and assertive is more of a masculine thing, you know, which would explain why narcissistic personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder are diagnosed more in men, and then in women, borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder are more diagnosed than in women. It makes sense, doesn't it? Because it's more, attention seeking and emotional state, whereas with the other two, it's violence and aggression, a lot of domineering behavior, which we associate more with men, don't we? But it's just cultural things, it's not actually based in science. But you're going to see fixation on fantasies of power, success, and attractiveness. I'm going to get that promotion. I'm going to be the ruler of the world. I'm going to be the best ever, the greatest of all time. But you see how it can be used as a positive because they will be very goal oriented and they're going to do anything they can to achieve that goal, whether it means stepping all over you. You ever hear of Machiavellianism, based after Niccolo Machiavelli, an Italian royal emperor, I think he was. But his famous quote is the end justifies the means, basically meaning it doesn't matter what I had to do to achieve my goals as long as I got there. So you see a lot of virtue signaling nowadays where people are like how great they are and always talking about how hard the journey was and just how hard they worked, but they don't talk about all the people they stepped on to get to where they are, or the amount of people that they manipulated, discarded when they didn't need them, and abused them. That comes out afterwards, because you don't want to admit to the flaws. You want to say, I just worked really hard. When setbacks came my way, I brushed them to the side. Not this fella helped me out. And rather than being loyal to him, once I didn't need him anymore, I kicked him to the curb. You know what I mean? That doesn't sell, and that doesn't play on people's emotions as well as saying, I just worked so hard myself. It's quite common nowadays, unfortunately. But we also have, yeah, so you've got expectations of superior treatment from other people. I deserve special treatment. So if there's like, say, a fancy office and we're all in an equal position in work, well, I should obviously get that. It's like, why? You just assume you should have it, you know, because you're the best. Whereas a lot of people will probably tiptoe around and think, oh, no, I don't want to, I don't need that office. You have it. And then they'll be like, no, 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 it's okay, you have it. But if you say it to a person who's highly narcissistic, they'll go, oh, yeah, of course, I deserve that. So they'll take it. And you'll be like, oh, okay. We all expect people to be humble, but don't expect it from someone like this. You're also going to see constant demeaning, bullying, and belittling. And belittling is like what your man did that I was telling you about in the manual handling, like putting down, taking the piss out of you in front of everybody, being derogatory. They might be all right with you on like on one-to-one basis, but when they get you on their own, they might be fine. But once you're in a group, remember what he said? They've got to go up, you've got to go down. Any way they can belittle you, make you look like a fool. A lot of times, what I've seen is, and I've heard psychiatrists and psychologists say this as well. I think it's a good example, but narcissistic people will pretend that you've said something wrong, you know? Like, let's give a quick example. Um, what's two multiplied by two? And I'll say four. And then they might go, oh, four, you said five. Why'd you say five? It's obviously four. And you'll be like, oh, no, I said four. They'll be like, oh, yeah, sure you did. But they'll try and like call you out. It's the simple example, but so everybody else might not have heard you say something, but they will call you out and make it loud, and they'll kind of be saying, "Oh, this fella doesn't know this," or they'll make you look like a fool, you know. Um, and like say in the corporate world, there's a lot of good examples. So like, there's an email that they need you to send off, and then they might say, once you get confirmation, will you CC me on the email? Will you send it to me? So I need you to send this email to this company, and then once that's done, and they send you back an email, send that to me, and then you do. They don't open their emails, and they try and blame you and say, "Why didn't you send that to me?" Because they were late in responding. So it's an interesting one, but you need to keep copies of everything to cover your own arse because they'll look to throw you under the bus if they can. You know what I mean? And don't think for a second that they've got good nature. I would do that with everybody just to be safe because you never know who will throw you under the bus. But basically, they couldn't be wrong, so it must be you. You know what I mean? Or say, for instance, like storing water samples in an incubator, right? So you need to keep that at a constant temperature, and they didn't store it at the correct temperature. They might blame you for not collecting the samples correctly because it's not your job to store them at the right temperature. You just put it in the incubator. You know what I mean? But it's their job to have it at the right temperature. So then if the samples end up being contaminated, they might say, "Oh, you didn't collect them correctly. It couldn't have been me. I started perfectly." But if you delve into it, you might find something very different. You know what I mean? Just trying to come up with examples here off the top of my head, but basically, like, even if they make a mistake, they will do their damnedest to pin the blame on you. And even when you've got them banged to rights, you know what they'll do, and it's infuriating. It pisses me off so much because I've done this with narcissistic people before. You'll show them proof, and like, no, I sent that to you. No, I collected that perfect. I have evidence of it right here. They'll look at it and they'll go, "Oh, I see," and they'll walk off because they're banged to rights. The last thing that they want is to talk about it. They want to just sweep that under the carpet. That's done now, you know. That never happened, basically. And you might see them act quite childlike and go, that never happened. You're making that up or you're lying, you know. They will just not accept that they have done anything wrong. And that's because it's a bruise to the ego. Their ego is so inflated. They couldn't possibly be wrong. I don't make mistakes. I think you see that a lot with doctors, don't you? And that's why I talked about the Lucy Letby case, because I feel like a lot of people threw her under the bus. And I could absolutely believe that arrogant doctors and admins and everything, consultants would definitely do that to cover their own arse because they couldn't possibly make a mistake, could they? But anyway, I made a whole 2 hour long video on that, so you can check that one out yourself. Then we have intense envy of others and the belief that others are equally envious of them. Right, so there was this lad that lived on my road. I feel like I've got loads of good examples to give, but this lad on my road that spouted absolute nonsense. He was always the strongest, the bravest, you know, he was always the toughest as well. He got the most girls, you know, all this shit. And there was this very good looking Brazilian cleaner that worked in our school, and he ended up going to my school um, in third year. You know, so 2 years in a different school, then came to ours, and we were delighted to have him. Obviously, he used to spout the biggest amount of bullshit. But here's an example right now of envy and disbelief that I could get someone he couldn't. So I remember before I really fancied this one, I got a real crush on her. She was gorgeous, like she was really good looking. And me and the lads, now this is in a misspent youth, we robbed a few chocolates from the shop. I brought a few to her and gave them to her just as a present because I used to chat to her all the time. And she gave me a kiss on the cheek. And this lad looked in disbelief and was like, "Why would she kiss you on the cheek and not me?" He literally said that, right? And then the next day, and I didn't expect it. I was kind of like, "Ooh," you know, and you see the love hearts fluttering around. But I remember just thinking to myself, wow, this beautiful woman just kissed me on the cheek. Better rob her a few more chocolates. No, no, don't rob kids. Don't steal. This is when I was a stupid teenager, so don't be like me. But he said the next day, "Oh, Dan, you know the way she kissed you on the cheek, she did with me as well," and then start giggling and laughing. And then that changed to she gave him a BJ, so performed fellatio on him. Yeah, came over to his house. So it went from kissing him, and this is just like, this is so narcissistic, even saying it now, but I got a kiss on the cheek and I was delighted, you know. But then from that, he then spins the whole thing around and then goes, "You know, you got a kiss off her. Yeah, she kissed me as well in front of the principal." So it gets more and more unbelievable. And then not only that, she then came over to my house and sucked me off. Really? Yeah, sure. I was there thinking, are you for real? Okay, you believe your own bullshit, but fuck me, this is anyway. So just yeah, I got something he wanted, and then he spins the whole thing like it was a peck on the cheek. It was nothing serious, and then he turns the whole thing into a bigger story. Mental, and he is fucking mental. Unwillingness to empathize with the feelings, wishes, and needs of other people. So I was going to give an example and it completely slipped my mind. Definite ADHD here, by the way. I'm sticking with my original diagnosis. But there was an example before where there was a husband and a wife, and the wife was crying, and the husband was really pissy because he didn't get a promotion that he felt entitled to. It's like, I deserve this promotion. This other fella is nothing compared to me. How the hell could he get a promotion and I didn't? I'm so much better than him. And the wife's crying and she's teary eyed because her mother has just died. And yet the husband says, "What's wrong with you?" And she goes, "Oh, mom's just passed away," and she's crying into a tissue. Now, for anyone with an ounce of empathy, you'd say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. And your problems, you didn't get a fucking promotion in work. What do you fucking do?" You go, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." And here I am shouting on about all my problems. This lad didn't do that. He was like, "Are you not hearing me? I just said that I didn't get that promotion that I was due to get in work because that was basically, set in stone. I was going to get that promotion. You know, that's great, but we're talking about my problems. Even though I think her problems trump yours, Kyle. But that's a really good example because it's like you didn't get fired, you still have your job, you're still on a pretty good salary, but you didn't get a promotion you felt like you deserved. And somehow that's more important than my mother dying. Yeah, okay. You're not going to believe it. You know what I mean? That's the point I'm making. It's so out of this world that you wouldn't fucking imagine it. And you're kind of shocked. You're kind of like, are they being serious? Are they for real? Like, because have they not heard that I've just said a family member of mine has died? Not only a family member, my mother. How would you react if you heard that? I know I'd be like, Jesus, I'm so sorry. And here I am talking shite about my job. Are you okay? And just goes over their head. My problems trump yours, no matter how small they are. They're always bigger than yours. You know what I mean? And we have exploitation of others to achieve personal gain. And this is where I feel like autistic people get taken advantage of, sadly, because we are trusting, but we're also awkward and we're not as socially um, outgoing as other people. They're not going to come over and go, "Oh, look at the state of you." They're going to come over and offer you friendship. And because you're weak and vulnerable, they've got a steady supply of someone who's needy, who's vulnerable, who thinks great friends. But then what are they going to do? They're going to look to put you down and build themselves up, down. You know what I mean? And stamp all over you. Your rights mean fuck all to me. I don't care. I'm so much more important than you. Who do you think you are? And that's what they're going to use as well. They're going to offer you friendship, but then if you try and leave them, it's going to be, you're nothing without me. I made you what you are, essentially. Quite nasty individuals. And then a sense of entitlement to special treatment and obedience. So all this ties in with each other, but they're very good at getting what they want. They're very good at having people agree with them. So just even an example of that, the friend that I mentioned earlier who started giving a lad grief about his haircut, same guy, right? He um he met up with me and another mate. It was kind of like, they call them flying monkeys, where they'll back up whatever the narcissist says, essentially. And we were all thinking of doing workouts together, like circuit sessions. So that's what we did. He said he had this really good workout program from Leinster Rugby. So I was there thinking, okay, great, yeah. And he was like, "We'll do this every week and we'll get fit." And I was like, "Yeah, sounds good." Or maybe twice a week and we get fitter. So we were due to do our second session of the week. So we've done our first session. He said he got this from a Leinster rugby coach. And that's what we were going to base it off. You know what I mean? And me and him and then another lad. It was his idea. He had all the workouts. That's how it was going to be. We were all going to follow that workout program. Perfect. Sorted. Shows up the second workout of the week, looks at me and goes, "Where's the workout plan?" And I was like, What are you talking about? You said you had a whole set of workout programs from this Leinster coach. Where the fuck did that go? He was like, no, it was your turn to plan the workouts. So I was like, we never discussed that. But then the other lad starts backing up that fella because he's very confident when he speaks. Doesn't matter what he says. If you can say something with enough confidence, people will start to believe that you're right and everybody else is wrong. It's true. It's infectious, isn't it? And another lad before. So me and one of my mates from college, we were doing an experiment together, and he was quite sleep deprived and overworked. God love him. But we were lab partners, and I was kind of the way I process things is like methodically, and I do each bit at a time. It's my autistic brain, and it's quite good. It works for me, but it's not, beat, 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 rapido, rapido, hurry up. And he was kind of anxious. And I said, look, we're doing it right. It was turbidity testing. So basically, what you're trying to do is see solid particles in a liquid. They do it for water treatment to see if there's any, as you say, particles left over in the water, contamination. So we were doing our turbidity testing, and this other lad comes over and tells us we're doing it wrong. And I was like, look, we don't need your help. Can you please just piss off because you're annoying me now? And he kept coming over, looking at us and saying, oh, you're doing that arse ways, and this is wrong, and that's wrong. And my lab partner and my mate believed him. He started getting anxious. Was like, oh, we're doing it all wrong. We need to do it again. The lab demonstrator wasn't much help, so we both started getting anxious. I was like, look, let's just trust the process. He was like, no, 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 we need to do something different. Come on, let's try something else. Turns out we were doing it right the whole time. The other lad was doing it wrong, but because he said it with so much confidence. I mean, he nearly had me going, but the other lad believed him. It was like, took his word over mine because I wasn't as assertive. You know what I mean? People who are very assertive, like narcissists, can get their own way because they're very believable. They purely believe their own bullshit, and that's why you believe it as well. I'm just going to pause that for a second, guys, and I will get back to it in a moment. We're back. Sorry, guys. Got busy there. Had to bring the dog on a walk, and the dog, how dare I, Alfie Bev. That dog, how dare I say such a thing? But yeah, so we were talking about it, right? We're talking about narcissism and like all these things that we'll see here. So just go back up because I like visuals, and I think that's the thing that I like the most is no crown there. Well, there's a crown in the mirror because this woman. That's ironic because normally it's more associated with men, but they've gone with a woman in this instance. Um, you see how she thinks that I look like a queen, so therefore I must be treated like a queen. I'm better than everybody else, just by the fact that I'm alive. That means that I deserve everything in life. And like they have these visions of being very successful, and that can lead to them getting there because they are very driven. They want the success, they want the power, the fame, the glory. That's why they often are in charge. You'll see a lot of leaders that are narcissistic because most of us worry about how everything affects others. Are you okay with that? Are you all right with that? We're two people pleasing. Someone like this, they'll just go ahead. They don't care. How does this affect me? That's all I care about. And do you remember the example he gave, just talking about a husband who didn't get a promotion, but his wife just told him that her mother died, and yet he's going, oh, you're making it all about you now. I was talking about my problems. Doesn't matter what the problem is for them, their problems are always bigger than yours. And it's hard to comprehend it. Like, it really is because you're there, like, are they serious? Like, no human in their right mind would be that insensitive, but that's how they are. So they think, well, how do they charm their way into people's lives? Because if, and they always say this, right? So someone who's attractive and narcissistic is very dangerous because then they can use the charm. People who aren't even attractive will have the power of deception. They can use their powers of deception to get where they want to be. Look at Jeffrey Epstein, managed to convince lots of people in top universities. I think it was Stanford University that he managed to convince that he was a mathematician, and he'd no degrees whatsoever from any colleges, not even a community college. I think he dropped out. I could be wrong on that, but he managed to bullshit his way to the top because he was very smooth with his words. We all know what he got up to. So I won't go into that. The channel will never get spread. But you can see the powers of narcissists. And I mean, look at President Trump at the moment. Say what you want, like, about him, but you can see clear narcissism there. Like, there's no denying it. I'm the biggest, I'm the best. It's not just going to be the biggest, it's going to be the best, it's going to be huge, huge. And there's enough people doing shitty Donald Trump impressions, so will I hop on the bandwagon? You're a terrible reporter, you're fired. You can say he's funny or whatever, but you can't deny his lack of empathy, and he's a power hungry bastard as well. So I'm not saying he's a good person, he might be entertaining, but he's not a good human being. Let's put it that way. Not that he cares what any of us think because his ego's so massive. He's just not swayed by it. And like I talked about narcissism running deep in my family and in particular my dad's side of the family. This is an example now, and I empathize with my dad because he grew up in such a narcissistic household. And I think in his own way he shows empathy towards me and my brother. But if this isn't the lack of empathy, I don't know what is. This example really just, I was like, do you not see what's wrong with this? And it'll show you. So one of his mates, when he was doing his apprenticeship, he cheated on his wife and she found out, and she went mental. She got very upset. She wasn't thinking logically, and she threatened to kill herself, like held a knife to her wrists and all. And an ambulance was called, and she spent the night in the emergency room. And this is my dad telling me this. So he went out with this fella. They went to a pub, and then he was telling me all about it. And then he said, "Oh yeah, well, his wife found out that he was cheating on her, and she tried to kill herself. I had a good night though." You're like, "Oh, well for you. Yeah, I hope you did. How is she?" Like literally, I'm not making that up, right? He literally said to me, "She tried to kill herself, followed immediately by, but I had a great night." Okay. And then I said it to him in the car before. I was just joking with him. I was like, "Yeah, Jiz, you said, she tried to kill herself and I had a great night. And I was kind of implying that's not a normal thing to say. And I was kind of giving him an out, a chance to go, yeah, probably not good timing. And he just goes, "Oh, but I did have a good night though." And I was like, that's not the point. The point is, you should have told me how she was. He was mad. And then I asked, "Well, how is she? Is she okay? Did she get out of hospital? Is she still in hospital? How is she?" Because I showed empathy. I showed concern for a woman who, God love her, either threatened or did attempt to take her own life. And I'm like, "Is she all right?" That never came into his head. And you can see that with my granddad and my uncles and my auntie. There's just no care. There's no real empathy there. And it's upsetting when you admit it to yourself. But that's what it's like. It's been normalized to me. So then being autistic, but also having narcissism normalized, you're only good when you make me look good, that kind of way. Though I don't tolerate a lot of bullshit that goes along with that side of the family anymore. I just say I'm not prepared to deal with it. And they don't bother. I call them out in their bullshit and they play the victim. And this is something you're going to see as well. It's just something to watch out for because these are dangerous people. And even if they're in your own family, that's probably especially when they are, because you think family is for life. They obviously love you no matter what. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. Like I've talked about as well before, I went over there, did up the whole garden, cooked, cleaned, washed my granddad's clothes. None of it's appreciated. All it's noticed is, oh, you're using electricity, oh, you're not giving me money, you owe me money. And finding the negative in everything. And I think if if I were a psychiatrist, which again I'm not, but when I heard the description of covert narcissist, I thought of my granddad instantly. It's the attitude of I could have had the same opportunities as everybody else. If only my family were richer, and if only I hadn't gotten ill, if only this hadn't happened. It's never that this person is great, well done to them. It's, oh, they just got lucky. They had better opportunities. They were better off than we were. They had more chances. wealthier family, you name it, they'll find an excuse to drag that person down. That's a characteristic you're going to see a lot with narcissists, is dragging people down. But you'll notice the miserable nature of a covert narcissist because they'll just sit there doing nothing but moan about how everybody else is so terrible. You're like, well, what have you done? You know what I mean? And yeah, it's just quite frustrating to deal with. But that empathy, not there. Don't expect it. It's just not there. And if you do get any, you'll get a very small amount. And you might think it's genuine empathy, but if you're a father, let's say, and you're narcissistic, you want your child to be a representation of you. And my dad has said to me several times, you're representing me. You're going out, you're representing me. So, don't make a show of me. Don't ruin this for me. It's all about me. You're my sons. So you make me look good. That kind of way. So you kind of have to decide for, well, what is genuine love? Because it should be unconditional. But with a narcissist, unfortunately, it very rarely is, if ever. So, exploring narcissistic personality disorder. In this section, you'll learn about the hallmarks and diagnostic criteria of narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, including its implications on empathy. There we are now. Characteristics of narcissism. Narcissism involves a range of traits characterized by an inflated sense of one's importance and a deep need for excessive attention and admiration. Self-importance. You might notice that individuals with narcissistic traits often display a grandiose sense of self-importance. They may talk about personal achievements and talents as though they're unmatched, even when such claims are unfounded. So I remember when I was talking about the lad when he saw me getting kissed by the really good-looking Brazilian cleaner. He had to one-up me. He couldn't just say, I also got a kiss. It was, oh, the principal saw us. And then she came back to my house where she then sucked me off. Like, for folks, really, yeah. You could have just said she kissed you. I would have probably believed you on that one. But to then go and take it to the next extreme, unbelievable. And you'll hear people that are highly narcissistic. It's always how great they are. They've no flaws. Everyone else is beneath them. And if you beat them, it's because you had an unfair advantage. So notice that as well. Very sore losers, you know? And that's what I didn't like about myself now when I was, really training my arse off in rugby. And I became quite, I would say, narcissistic because my ego was very easily bruised. I had to have everything perfect. Everything had to go right for me. If it didn't, I was a failure. And they have that inner critic, narcissists do, where it's always saying you're worthless, you're nothing. But then they compensate for that by portraying that they're the best. You know what I mean? But deep down, there's a belief that they're not good enough. So they have to, one up it and go, no, I'm the best and I will be the best. You'll often notice it with family dynamics. So, for instance, like let's use my own one as an example. My auntie was spoiled rotten and told she was wonderful. She went to university, and my grandparents spoke about how proud they were of her. Everyone runs around after her, tiptoes around her, and she feels very entitled to everything. She thinks she's owed the family house and everything. It doesn't matter what it is, she thinks she's entitled to that just because she's her, and she lives abroad but thinks she's entitled to the house. That makes her more entitled to the house. How do you work that one out? But their rationale is just completely bizarre. Whereas my dad was put down, belittled, and really was. My heart goes out to him. He was always in the wrong no matter what he did. So he feels more like, nobody gave me a helping hand. So, and no one did, in fairness to him. Like, credit where it's due. He worked his arse off and got to where he is on his own. That's why I have empathy for him. But it can be hard being around him for any length of time because he's always dragging people down or saying, oh, sure, they're, an alcoholic or they're a drug addict, they're a gambler, but completely ignores the fact that he drinks quite heavily, smokes, and maybe he's doing well now, but I'd hate to think there was no relationship there. Now that would crush me with him, like I do love him. Of course I do. He's my dad and he has helped me in ways, but if he does something for you, he will often let you know about it, I mean, he has helped and he has. I have to give credit where it's due, but My mum will do stuff and not expect anything. She'll just do it. You know, she's a highly empathetic person, almost too much in some cases. But I know any of that family, my aunties, they would do something and they wouldn't expect anything in return, you know. And we've all got a better relationship now, which I'm very grateful for. It wasn't always that way, and I'm very grateful it is now. And they do look out for me, and I hope I can do the same for them. But yeah, you're dealing with someone who just thinks they're so superior and unmatched to everybody. You know, they're the best, and everybody else has problems. You all have problems, not me. No, it couldn't be me. I'm perfect. Then we have fantasies of success. Their inner world can include fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. I only deserve the best because I am the best. But deep, deep down, I don't genuinely believe that. But I have to, it means I have to push this narrative even more. God forbid that I admit what I am, you know, not good enough. You know, I'm only good by my achievements. That's why you'll see a narcissistic parent say that to their children because that's how they live. They believe genuinely you're only as good as what you achieve in life. How you get there, who gives a shit, you know? And I would say the whole idea of the American dream is very narcissistic, you know, the get rich quick schemes. And then you find out they're all con men, like the Wolf of Wall Street, let's say, Jordan Belfort. I mean, high levels of narcissism in Wall Street, you know, trampling all over people to get what you want. That's more of a malignant narcissist where you actively seek to hurt people and fuck people over, you know, while strumming your own ego. You know, the fuckers with the Wall Street mullets, as I call it, the Patrick Bateman haircut, Christian Bale. And he'd be an example of someone who's highly narcissistic as well. Never mind psychopathy or anything like that. Let's talk about narcissism as it is. They want power and domination because that's what they can use. If they've got more money, then they can lord that over you. You know, they have tools that they can use. You think about it like that, you know. If you if you are poor and don't have much, right, you come from an impoverished background, what is your weapon as a narcissist? If you're mentally ill, on top of it, you're going to try and look for sympathy, aren't you? You're going to want people to pity you because your life situation is so difficult. But if you get money, you can lord that over people. If you achieve stuff in life, you can then say how wonderful you are. You know, you can buy the flash car and expect to see that too. If they've got money, they're going to let you know about it because they have to show you how much better they are than you. But expect a few ill-gotten gains. That's what I would say. Sense of entitlement, and as we talk about, narcissists often expect special treatment. When I talk about my auntie, she always expected everyone to pick her up and drop her to the airport. You know, and she was quite grandiose in her way. You know, she's entitled to everything. Doesn't matter what it is. I think it's a great example. You know, it's been right in front of me. But she expects everyone to drop her to and from the door and do whatever she wants, you know, because it's all about her. And I deserve the house because, you know, I live abroad. So that means I need somewhere to come back to. You barely, you know, you're barely back. So, and here's just how their mind works, right? It's fucked up. Like it's a fucked up family dynamic. But my dad would pay for the TV in my granddad's house, right? So that they had an agreement going on. The agreement was that my auntie would pay for the Wi-Fi, and when me and my brother were staying in my granddad's house for college, she turned it off. You know, and my dad said, "Oh, she's not paying for it anymore. That was the agreement or something." I went back to that house after she'd been staying in it, and I hadn't been there for a while. And I connected up. My phone connected up to the Wi-Fi. She gotten it back when we weren't there. Like that, it's quite vindictive. Do you know what I mean? Imagine doing that to your own family, but then playing nicey nicey, you know, all the while. Unbelievable. They believe they're entitled to all this special treatment and want others to comply with their expectations. Meet my demands or there'll be consequences. So the key takeaway here, narcissism can show up as arrogance or an inflated self-image, with individuals often expecting preferential treatment and harboring unrealistic dreams of success. We have the symptoms here again. I like the crown analogy because the crown puts me above you, and you see how the person is quashed down here, but I've got my crown. And then here you have it here. Feels exaggeratedly significant without proportionate achievements. So you think you're the best, but you haven't done anything to justify thinking that. You know what I mean? Like what I gave the job promotion example. Somebody else might have worked harder, been a better employee, helped out their fellow employees, whereas you're just out for number one, but yet you think you deserve that promotion because you are better than everybody. It's just a God given right that you have over everybody else, you know? Similar to maybe in a rugby team, just using a sport that I love. But I've seen a lot of narcissistic individuals like coaches, etc. But a guy might believe he deserves to start and be captain, you know. But there's another lad who does a lot more training than he does, puts in a lot more effort, and also was a lot more of a team player, doesn't just expect the glory. So you might get a lad who's very naturally gifted, which would, give him an air of narcissism because, he rocks up, does what he wants, but doesn't put in the effort. Other guys put in the effort and they out train him because he's just not bothering his arse. He rocks up and just expects to start because he is the way that he is. He's the best. And I mean, I love this show. I think it's hilarious, but Eastbound and Down with Danny McBride, Kenny motherfucking Powers is a great example of a grandiose narcissist in all seriousness. His problems are always bigger than everybody, bigger, stuttering for a second, but his problems are always much bigger than everybody else's. Even with his own child, he shows that, you know, I'm so busy I can't afford to look after a child, and his wife April, is struggling, but he doesn't care because it's too much for him. You know what I mean? Great show though. But he even goes as far as to steal, and I'm only getting to that episode now. Spoiler alert! But Jason Sudeikis, is it Sudeikis or Sudeikis? Sudeikis. I think it's Sudeikis. I'm going to stick with that Lithuanian name, I believe. But he's Kenny's best friend in the baseball team, the Merman, down in Myrtle Beach, and they're best buddies. But they're off doing drugs, hookers, and everything. It doesn't matter. They're up to no good. Kenny's not training properly at all. He's binge drinking. He's taking drugs, and his performance slips. And a Russian fella, Ivan, comes over and has a really strong right arm and outpitches him, and Kenny still feels entitled to start because I am Kenny Powers. I think it's a great example, though, to be fair, even though it's a funny show and I love it. And I love Danny McBride. But he abuses Stevie in it as well. So, Stevie's just there to meet his needs. There's no give and take. It's all take from Kenny. Kenny, when he shoots Stevie in Mexico. But Stevie's obviously more socially awkward, and he's quite inept and feeble, I would say. He's quite a weak character, and Kenny, capitalizes on this. And he's also a big fan of Kenny's, so does whatever Kenny wants, and Kenny expects him to put his wife aside for him whenever he calls. Takes money from him, he exploits him. I think it's a really good example. As funny as the show is, Kenny really exploits Stevie big time. Um, and then doesn't even initially want to look after his own son. And he steals Jason Sudeikis' character. He steals his nice big Jeep after he dies. He takes it from him, and just says, when he's dead after an overdose, give me a sign and I won't take the truck. Okay, I'll take the truck. And he takes it. So he's stealing from his friend who's just died. There's no empathy or remorse there. As funny as it is, it's a great example of grandiose narcissism. So there you have the exaggeratedly significant, um, without the proportionate achievements. Feels special, strives for a high status relationship. So, a lot of, again, narcissistic people will have a beautiful wife, but they treat the wife terribly, but they're, holding them and they love them. And I mean, it can work the other way around, but it's usually the example that's given as a man and a woman. The domineering man, and the wife is just there to meet his needs and do whatever he wants, but he never puts in any effort or thinks about her. And you see it a lot, in fairness. I would say you do see that a lot more with men than you do with women. Where the wife's expected to raise the kids and do everything for him to make him feel good, but he does fuck all in return, and that's not right either. Like that's not fair at all. Um, you should treat your wife as an equal, just FYI. But it's an unfortunate state of affairs, isn't it? You often wonder why women go back to men like that, but there's a draw in there. Like they're charming, they're manipulative, they're brilliant at manipulating. So don't think that you're going to see it coming, and don't think that you're going to be prepared for it. You know, unless you know that that person is a narcissist, and you have your guard up the whole time, which is exhausting. Let me tell you, it's very easy to forget as well. You know, there's no sense of empathy. We discussed that in great detail, and I think I've made a good point there that it'll be shocking how little empathy they have. It's mad. You couldn't believe it. You're there thinking, are they actually being serious? Surely you couldn't be that cruel and cunning, but they can. Manipulates and controls everyone. Basically, if you're not with me, you're against me. So you side with me. And a lot of people fear their wrath, so they decide to go and support them. Like I said, my mate saying, where's the workout program? And I was like, you said you were going to get it from a Leinster coach, and that's what we were going to follow. But my other friend was too afraid to confront them. Either that or he just bought his bullshit, which I think a bit of both, to be honest. But he was always the more domineering personality, and a lot of people fell in line with him. And to even give you an example, I was at a Hungarian friend. I was at her house, her family's house, and we were having a barbecue. I was a little hungover, so I was relaxed here, so having a few beers to hair the dog, as they say. We're having a good time, and they invited me to their house. He literally calls me, and I'm like, "Sorry, mate, I'm at a barbecue with my friends and their family. Oh, ditch that." And I was like, "No, I'm comfortable here," and he wouldn't do it for me. And I'm like, "I'm not ditching it." He's like, "Oh, we're longer mates. Leave that." He was always telling me, "Ditch that, leave that, don't go there." You know, bossing and controlling people. But also put downs, like as you say, with the bad skin fade and calling people a fat see you next Tuesday, and really trying to control you. And as soon as I didn't put up with it anymore, you don't hear much. They're just trying to rope other people in to be your flying monkeys, as they call them. Stamp on you as well. And a lot of people I've been around with sadly are very weak, and they'll go with the loudest voice in the room. The most obnoxious fucker who seems the most confident, because they look like they can handle themselves if you start saying anything to them. So it's better to be on their side than against them. Do you know what I mean? I hope that makes sense. They always feel right no matter what. And they can be very convincing because they believe their own lie. Even when they're banged to rights, they'll never admit they're wrong. And even when you've got them banged to rights, as you say, it's, oh, okay, no admission that they're wrong. Just walk away. You're like, admit you were wrong, you fucking prick. Well, don't expect it, because they'll just leave it, even though you've proven them wrong. And if you do it in front of everybody, then their ego is very bruised. And it's a very nice feeling, let me tell you. Yeah. He envies and thinks about what other people envy him. Yeah, the example of he, I think, is better in this instance. Yeah, so like, I want what they have, I deserve what they have. Everybody else is just jealous of me as well. They want what I've got. So it's like, these people, don't deserve what they have. I deserve what they have. And I bet everybody else is jealous of me, beneath me. But I'll get to that person at the top throne, top dog. I'll be there soon. Yeah, no problem. It requires respect, gratitude, it. So they've gone from he down to it. Requires respect, gratitude, and admiration. It kind of goes without saying, doesn't it? feels unique and thinks he has special rights. And I spoke about my auntie there, because I mean, it can happen in either gender, but more common in men. Arrogant, arrogant, and arrogant with people. A lot of arrogance in there, but I think they've done a good job hammering it home, especially if they are below his rank. The last place you want to be is an employer, sorry, an employee to a narcissistic boss, because they will fucking use their position of authority. Any bit of leverage they have, they will use it over you. So you're in for a world of pain, unfortunately. There'll be put downs, they'll be, trying to catch you off guard, you know what I mean? Make you nervous, make you lose your cool, and unnerve you, would be another way of putting it. So the diagnostic criteria for NPD. According to DSM-5, the diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder encompass a persistent pattern of grandiosity, a constant need for admiration, and a lack of empathy. So the criteria overview: a grandiose sense of self-importance, preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success and power. Enough is never enough. I desire all the power and attention, and I won't stop until I've got it. You think, okay, you should be happy with what you have. They're never happy with what they have, because there's a deep sense of emptiness and a void. Remember, we talked about the void when I was talking about borderline personality disorder? The void for a narcissist is power, admiration, and power, and they can never have enough of it. They're their own worst enemy at the end of the day. Belief in being special and unique and can only be understood by or associated with high status people. So they might even look up to certain people, but those people are going to be in positions of power because that's where they want to be. So if I admire this person and I desire to be like them, I can be where they're at. You know what I mean? And even more. So they could really admire someone who's in a higher position than them. Then they get there, and now it's like, oh, I don't really need you anymore. I need to climb the ladder a bit more. So they'll just drop people, like a hot snow, pretty much. A need for excessive admiration. So you can never tell me enough times that I'm great. You need to say it all the time. And if you don't, I'm going to punish you for it, because how dare you defy me? Like the spoiled prince. I think actually a Prince Andrew, do you ever hear about that story with the teddy bears? One of his guards said that he used to have them all lined up the same way and would have hissy fits if they weren't done exactly the way he wanted. Don't bring the teddy bears into this, Andrew. Randy Andy, you dirty bastard. A sense of entitlement. We know that, don't we? Um, I deserve all this. There's no sense of I haven't earned it. It's I deserve it, so I'm going to get it. You know, like with Kenny Powers in that truck, he wants it, so he's going to take it. You know, exploitative, interpersonally exploitative behavior. Again, our boy Kenny, like sponging off someone staying in someone's house, bullying them. If they know that they're admired by someone, and the person says, "Oh yeah, it's great to have you over," they'll never leave. They'll take money from you. They'll steal your belongings. They'll just take what they want. I need this, so I'm taking it. That kind of way. Lack of empathy. Again, my problems are always bigger than yours. I don't give a shit what you're going through. You need to be there for me, but don't expect me to be there for you when you need me. You know, I need you to pick up the pieces for me, but don't expect it done in return. You are here to serve me. Envy of others or belief that others are envious of them. Yeah. Oh, that person is something I want. How did they get that? They don't deserve it. Or, like your man, I said, why did you get a kiss and I didn't? You know? And then, oh, she kissed me too. And then, oh, it was in front of the principal. Then, oh, I got a BJ offer in my house. Are you jealous yet? Without saying it, you're kind of insinuating it, even though it probably didn't happen. Let's be real. Fair enough. Well, all right. Demonstrating arrogant and haughty behaviors or attitudes. Yeah, so like haughty is kind of like, temper tantrums almost, like a child, you know. So like I've had that fella again that I was speaking about, that friend that I was talking about. where he'll just go, "Oh, that didn't happen," or be very childlike if I catch him out in a situation and he has the finger pointed at him, where he's being slagged off and it's not me, because when the slags are going in my direction, it's fine. He's happy. But when it goes in his direction, it's, well, that didn't happen, or, you're stupid, or it can be very defensive and very childlike. You know what I mean? We're literally we're messing on the boxing machine, to get a high score. He got the high score, and then I beat his high score, and he literally kept putting coins into the machine. I think he spent something like 12, maybe 14 euro just to be, and if this was euros, so he kept going with it, and like 14 times, he just kept banging the thing until he got a higher score than me, and I was like, oh, this is fucking exhausting. There's like, congratulations, you beat my score, well done. He just kept putting the money into the thing, punching the bag, until he beat my score. I beat him and I beat two of them, two of the lads, and then he just kept going. I was like, all right, fine, you can have it. Well done, you. And then another friend who was doing kickboxing, and he was like, oh, let's spar. And I was kind of like, oh, I'm not really in the mood for it. Then he started jabbing me one of the gloves. So I was like, all right, yeah, put on the gloves. And I knocked him into the washing machine. I was like, oh, shit, yeah, all right. So I obviously won. He went to hit me and I knocked him on his arse. Then afterwards, he kept trying to prove, oh, you only won because you have a longer reach than me. And it wasn't the fact that maybe I'm just a better fighter than you, and I wasn't trying to prove anything. You'd piss me off. That's why I hit you as hard as you fucking did. So we've got inflated self-importance, self-absorption, sense of grandiosity, pretentious and arrogant behavior, lack of intimacy, lack of empathy, emotional dysfunction, inflated egos. And then we just talk about empathy in a bit more detail. Empathy and narcissism. Empathy refers to the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, a trait that can be significantly impaired in those with narcissistic personality disorder. Understanding empathy. Empathy allows you to put yourself in someone else's shoes. With NPD, the capacity to do so is often compromised, leading to challenges in personal relationships. Lack of empathy. Individuals with NPD may struggle to recognize the desires and feelings of others. They may dismiss them, prioritize their own needs, or exploit others without guilt. Yeah, so like we talked about there, they can't put themselves in other people's shoes, nor do they want to. They don't care. They just don't give a shit. What you're going through means nothing to me. But when I'm going through shit and I feel terrible, you better be there for me, but I won't be there for you. Don't even expect it. How dare you even ask. But I can also do extremely terrible things. When you see someone who's vulnerable and you think to yourself, right, like, that person is kind, they're a nice person. Why would I want to take advantage of them? But people like this see that as a weakness that needs to be exploited. Kindness is a weakness, you know what I mean? So I'll just keep taking because they're willing to keep giving, which is why you got to protect yourself, you know what I mean? And not just give to everyone because while it's nice, it's not always going to work for you. And so if you've identified someone that keeps asking you for shit and keeps taking from you, don't give it to them. Stand up for yourself. You've got to do it. I know it's hard, but we've got to protect ourselves. So the key takeaway: empathy is generally low in people with NPD, which can affect their social interactions and relationships. Understanding this can be the key to navigating relationships with individuals showing narcissistic tendencies. And then we get to the kind of overlap and misconceptions, because people often say one condition leads to the other, or autistic people are narcissistic, which isn't the case. I just want to highlight that. Now, narcissistic people can have autism and autistic people can have narcissism, but they're not two and the same. You know what I mean? Or one and the same, I should say. In exploring autism and narcissism, it's essential to discern their unique characteristics and frequent misconceptions that surround them. Autism versus narcissism misunderstanding. Autism is characterized by challenges in social interaction, communication, and restricted interests or repetitive behaviors. Narcissism, on the other hand, involves the inflated sense of self importance and a deep need for admiration, coupled with a lack of empathy for others. Misconceptions arise, when people mistakenly attribute a lack of social response from individuals with autism to narcissism. One may perceive this as self-centered behavior when it's usually not about ego, but rather about dealing with sensory and processing differences. Yeah, so like you might tell someone with autism bad news and they might not give any response, which I understand. And look, I get where a neurotypical person might come from with this. I always had empathy, but I didn't always know how to respond, and I hated talking to people. So if someone tells me something, I'm like, well, what do you want me to do with this information? It's not that I don't care. I don't know how to respond to that. Now, I do now. Like if you tell me your dog died, geez, I bawl my eyes out and start crying and be like, oh my God, are you okay? Because sadly I lost a dog and it's horrific. So I'd be able to put myself in that person's shoes. And I can do that now. Before I would have been very upset, but I wouldn't know what response was appropriate to give at that time. It was like, do you want me to hug you? You want me to? Because I used to always get that my response was either too much, it was over the top. It was like, what, what the fuck can I do? What am I supposed to do here? It's hard to get it right, what's socially acceptable because we're all playing by neurotypical rules, which aren't right. Their way isn't right and our way is wrong. It's just that one's acceptable in public and the other's deemed not socially acceptable. So, potato, potato. All right, then. Key traits of autism. We've kind of gone over this, haven't we? Communication, limited eye contact, or difficulty in understanding social cues, kind of self explanatory. Repetitive actions or strict adherence to routine can be expected. Narcissism, manipulative behaviors and entitlement, lack of understanding or concern for other people's feelings. Then we go through the lists again. Yeah, so differential diagnosis talks about the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM-5. It's the guideline used by professionals to diagnose these conditions accurately. So, persistent deficits in social communication and interactions across various contexts for autism, restricted and repetitive behaviors, patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. And then with narcissism, grandiosity, constant need for admiration, lack of empathy, and exploitative, take, take, take. It's all about me. I get everything, you get nothing, and I deserve everything and you deserve nothing. Yeah, so yeah, I think it's a good page. If you want to keep reading it, it's from restequation.com, autism and narcissism. So I think that's a good place to stop the share and to just bring it back into the room. Three, two, one, you're back in the room. Anyone remember that from Little Britain? Matt Lucas playing the hypnotist. But yeah, so I'd like to then make the point that while you can have autism and narcissism, and vice versa, of course, but it's very easy for autistic people to get taken advantage of by individuals with narcissistic traits because they're usually good at getting a posse. They're good at leading people because they know exactly what they want, whereas someone who's more empathetic might not know because they don't want to affect everybody else. They're far more agreeable. Narcissistic people are very disagreeable people, and as a result of that, they know what they want. They don't give a shit what you want. So their goal is straight and the path is paved for them. You know what I mean? There's no bumpy road. I know exactly what I want and I'm going to do exactly what it takes to get it. People who are more agreeable and empathetic might be, oh, well, what does everyone want? Is everyone happy? You're okay with this? That kind of way. And then I find a lot of autistic people to be quite agreeable, as a matter of fact. A lot of high functioning people, anyway, are very open to other people's suggestions. Now, can be people who are lower function who can appear like my way or the highway because it's too distressing not getting my own way. But I feel like that's also bad parenting where you've given in to them all the time. So they have to have their own way. And I say that as an autistic person, you know what I mean? I don't feel like you have the right to just have your own way all the time because you've autism. You have to, you know, empathize with your family and what they're going through as well. Like I've had to do that. it's only right, they're going through shit, and I put them through that a lot of times. So, when you're young, you can be excused for it, but as you learn techniques and relationships require give and take, so it's not all about you. You know what I mean? But at the same time, a lot of us are naive in the autism spectrum. Making friends didn't come naturally to us. So a lot of times we're happy with the first person that shows us any sort of compassion and kindness. And that can be a narcissist, but then as it grows, and that's when it's dangerous. It doesn't start out bad because how would they, lure you in? They need someone to mock and put down. So you go down, they go up. You know what I mean? And that makes them look better. And if people laugh, there's a lot of bullying that goes on with these individuals because they have to put you down. They're not going to go for someone who's very confident. It's like the best analogy is when lions are hunting wildebeest. It's a very good analogy, because they don't go for the strongest one. They try and separate the weakest ones from the herd. And then they lap on it and they attack it. They don't go for the strongest wildebeest, and then even more so would be if they're hunting water buffalo, who are absolute beasts. You're not going to go for the biggest one because Jay's there at machines. You're going to try and separate the calf from the herd. It always makes me quite sad, when you see a baby dying in the wild, but circle of life, I guess. And that's what a narcissist does. It weeds out it. Yeah. They've used it in the example I gave, but they're not going to go for someone who's very confident. What they might do is they might try and get a group of people to tear that person down. They're very good at scheming and planning, you know what I mean? But they're not going to go straight for that person. So what they'll do is they'll try and recruit people who will act as their flying monkeys, like the bystander when someone is bullying somebody else. They've got their posse with them who will keep the bullying going, essentially, you know. That can often be even more devastating for the person getting bullied is the people who stand by and do nothing or contribute and back up the bully. Because it's easier to do that. It's easier to pick on the little guy who's got no one in his corner than it is to confront the popular kid with all the gang, because then go against them and unleash the flying monkeys. You know what I mean? Um, and that's the thing, as autistic people, we're usually more quiet, we're usually a lot more awkward. Someone who is narcissistic will be quite charming, quite confident, outgoing, communicate well with others, read others quite well. They're quite good at scanning people for potential weaknesses. I've noticed they're very predatory in the way that they operate. So you've got to watch out for it, and unfortunately, a lot of us are victims to this shit. But if we spot it, we know when it's happening, we can avoid it. And if we've good people in our corner, they can help us out, because you can't do it all on your own. But you can definitely put tools in place, and when you're surrounded by people like this for long enough, you start to become someone you don't want to be. And I was like that. I start becoming someone I just, look back on with shame that I was like that. But luckily, I'm taking the steps to get away from that, and look out for the right people, trying to help the little guy if I can. But yeah, guys, I think I've talked enough about that, and hope you enjoyed it. It's been an interesting one, and one I've just felt like I needed to make. And I'm gonna do another one like this. I'll upload that after this one. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and slán go fóill.